Welcome, welcome everyone to this month's episode of Unlearning. This month we are unlearning or beginning the process of unlearning ableism together. I'm currently showing a navy blue screen with a banner of turquoise phoenixes at different angles. And the top right is the LTHJ Global icon or logo. And in the center, it reads Unlearning Ableism, July 6, 2022. We're just going to allow for a couple more moments for people to arrive. Also naming that we have some wonderful individuals here to support us with signing today. And they are just getting themselves situated in order to help to add to this beautiful experience in this community that is ever growing and expanding. So just a couple more minutes as everyone arrives here. And as a reminder, as much as possible, we invite you to be on camera. We're imagining that we are in a space together, building and creating community. We're off of our computers. We've put our cell phones down. Yes, there are probably small dogs or cats or humans in various levels of clothedness running through the background. Totally acceptable. But in terms of the space that we are creating here, is it like the Oprah show? Probably. In which case we would be all in person. We would have been fed cheese and crackers. And please look under your seat. There is a candle. You're welcome. So just another cup. Laura, there's no candle under my chair, just for future episodes. So get here, get situated, grab your snack food, grab your coffee and your tea. If it's that time on the coast that you're joining us from, I know some of us are here from SA, go ahead and grab that glass of wine and we will get started in just a moment.
Thank you. And Lindsay, I'm going to take a minute to make sure that Stephen can see himself signing. So the spotlight view might change for a second. So we'll just give a minute for that.
Thank you. You're waiting, and while Stephen and Laura do a little bit of background magic, go ahead and drop a little comment in the chat window. Let us know where you're joining us from. Let us know your pronouns. Let us know where you are in the state of early on your ableism journey, well-centered on your ableism journey, maybe far forward on your ableism journey. Let us know where you're entering into the practice today. To all the panelists, letting you know that we have 72 guests with us here today in community. Okay, we have people joining us from Kansas. We have people joining us from Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington. Radha is an occupational hearing conversationist and speech pathologist, mom of twins, have one child with Down syndrome. I've worked with people with special needs for nearly 20 years. Joining us from Manhattan, Kansas, the Little Apple. Yes. Janet has been working in disability inclusion for 30+ years. Tanya is joining from Anchorage, Lauren from Redmond, Washington, Crystal in Portland. Wow, I love this. I love this. What a gift. Just in a time where if you were to, as always, read the news cycle, it would make us think. It actually is designed to make us think that we are disconnected from one another, that we are so different from one another that we should never find even or medium ground to engage in discourse, but each time you all are here joining us, Tina's joining us from London, we are reminded of just how close and connected we could be. And so thank you everybody again for joining up to build this space together and create this community. I'm on a slide now that says welcome, and it is going to point us to some housekeeping. Please notice that there are captions that you can enable on your screen if they are not already enabled. If you are having some questions about that, please reach out to Laura Kay, and they will help you get set up with those live captions. We have live ASL interpretation today, and our community guidelines are a reminder that this is a space where we invite a both and. So I can both have never had that experience before based on my lived experience, my privilege, my status, being of agent ranked status, different class, or I can move into an and space of, and I open myself up to learn about different perspectives, different viewpoints, different ways of moving through the world. So that pretty much sums up our community guidelines. Also a reminder that we will be recording, and that is because about 250 to 300 people register every time we have one of these sessions, but not everybody can join at this time. And so many people are dependent on the recording. The panelists and myself and our ASL interpreters today will be in the recording. Unless you come off of mute to speak or put something in the chat window that I read out, you will not be visible on that recording. And that is T'Challa affirming what I just said. For those leaders, DEI champions within organizations, thinking about how can I bring DEI into my organization and make that something that is not just a nice to have, but a must to have. We encourage you to please watch this space. We've been working hard in the background of LTHJ Global to develop something to help you on your journey, keyword journey. Hold that word. You're gonna want that later as I tap my nose to remind you that I just said the word journey. Ha ha ha. There's a little secret in there. What's that called, Laura, when it's like a video game and then you put, it's an Easter egg. I put an Easter egg in there. Watch this space because we have been building something just for you to help you on your DEI journey, and we are going to be unveiling that in one of our future unlearning sessions. So what's up today? We're going to start, as always, with a nice deep breath. I'm warning you now that we're going to take a deep breath, so get ready for that. Then I'm going to introduce you to our very wonderful and exciting panelists. I'm so thankful that they have taken the time and the space to join us today. And then at the end of the hour, we're going to invite those who need to run off to various destinations because there's something about the top of the hour that makes us all into Cinderella. And then in those final 15 minutes, we're going to allow for time for questions and thoughts and just a little bit of potpourri moving around the world room, the virtual room, moving around the world, I started to say, and then we will depart. So welcome, welcome everybody. Let us get going. So first things up, let's take a breath together so that we can really enter this space. Deep inhale in. And deep exhale out. Beautiful. Neely Matthews, I met almost 6 months ago now, and I have to say that among all of their skills as a training manager at Kids Included Together, as well as being a certified therapeutic recreation specialist with over 30 years of experience working with people with disabilities, as well as having worked in physical rehabilitation, mental health, residential camping and community recreation. This is somebody you just want to sit down with over a glass of wine and just kind of drip like syrup over each of the words coming out of their mouth. So I'm so excited that Neely is here with us today, the great Neely Matthews. Neely, in order to help us get grounded in this space, because you have worked on both sides in terms of the theory and the practice of disability work and justice, for those people who are here today because ableism, that word, it's the first time they're hearing it, can you come off of mute and tell us a little bit about what is ableism?
Okay, that's a great question.
I like to start hard. Yeah.
I know. I think it would be defined for different people in different ways. I think that as somebody who is an advocate, and although I have my own challenges, I do not have the personal experience of growing up or having a significant disability as other people might consider. I have a vision impairment, which has gotten worse over the years. But I think ableism is really looking at individuals with whether you take someone's strengths and challenges and how you define what that looks like, whether you focus on what someone can do or their abilities as opposed to what they can't do or they have challenges doing. So I think when some people, you know, a lot of people within the disability community don't use very jargony words. They really define themselves as individuals, either with a disability or a disabled person. So I think it would be a different definition to different people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and goes along with so much of what we often are saying in this space, that one person cannot speak for an entire group. And yet within our construct, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm thinking of Leticia Nieto's work here, we often create this binary idea of identities. You are either able-bodied or disabled, and it's this all or nothing, this idea that you either fit into our society and the structure, or you are somehow other and outside, and we create this binary idea of able-bodied, disabled, meaning that able-bodied in this society is right and disabled is wrong.
Or less than.
Or less than, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. And I'm gonna kind of do my job really quick here. I think that maybe Laura should put something in the chat to, if you need sign language interpretation, to click through and find Stephen, because you need to actually see like that name to know that he's the one doing the ASL.
Yes, and
Thank
correct
you.
me if I'm wrong, Stephen is also pinned up at the top with Neely and I when we
Okay.
are speaking. Yeah, thank you.
See
Neely.
him earlier, so I wanted to make sure that was.
No, thank you. And thank you for the invitation to be in a constant state of learning and growth and development, or as we talk about, calling us into a closer relationship with our stated values. Yes, yes. I want to bring up Abby Griffith, who just in the process of preparing for this panel, and as always, Laura Kay is our show's producer, and I get to sit on the sidelines while Laura begins building these great relationships. And I've been building this fandom for Abby over the past couple of weeks. And so I'm so excited, Abby, that you're finally here. Abby is a Disability Mobility Initiative Fellow at Disability Rights Washington, born in Arica, a city in the Walaita Soto region of Ethiopia. I invite corrections on my pronunciation, please. She moved to the United States in 2008 at the age of 14. Abby is completely blind. And 2 years ago, she became involved in advocating for accessible transportation through Disability Rights Washington. I certainly hope you all had a read through of some of the great resources that, as recommended by Abby, we sent out in preparing for today's session, where she is now a Disability Mobility Initiative Fellow. Abby, welcome to today's session. Abby, in preparing for this discussion today, was there a sense of, was there a thought of, what, if there's one thing that everybody takes away from today's call, what is it that you would like to plant a seed in everybody's hearts or mind today as they prepare for this discussion and as they walk away from this discussion?
Thank you so much. I think I would say takeaway should be like, how do we think about other people, either blind, visually impaired, or other kind of disability, or people who are even like a low income, and how can we see people are just people?
Are you naming, Abby, the ways that our intersectional identities also play into disability justice in terms of when we, go ahead, sorry.
Yes, I think it does, because for me, I always like using myself, because I can't speak for anybody else, but like, I am Black African American and I'm totally blind, and I am woman, and my experience and discriminations and ableism from other people I experience are in different ways similar. Like, for me, being blind, for example, if I go to a restaurant with sighted person, the people in the restaurant who are serving us wanted to ask people who are with me, does she want this, or they don't want to talk to me because of my blindness, but otherwise I get discriminated because of me being Black, kind of like looked down.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, and we've spoken a lot in this space about moving through the world as, a Black and a Black woman. And so is there, if you're Black and a woman and blind, is there a sense that people really don't know how to treat you or to engage with you?
Oh yeah. Sometimes people treat me differently, but it's kind of difficult for me to separate them, because I'm totally blind. They're probably not wanting to talk to me because of my blindness, or it could be because I'm Black and they don't think they are I'm good enough, or I'm woman, or I think a lot of times I experience discrimination, well, in like places like educational places, even workplace, in person working. I am so glad to work remotely, because it's kind of less stress as Black person or people with disability. It's kind of my working in my own office, my own house is more safer for me. I speak for myself, but I feel like that because a lot of times I feel like I am experiencing discrimination in workplaces too. Couple few weeks, I want to say. I was my workplace. I work part-time at Clark College too, but I was picking up my technology, and I came with my coworker who is sighted, and she's white, and I don't like saying this, but it's kind of true. Sometimes it's good to say true things. So
Yes, you're in
the
the right
person,
place.
yeah, the person giving me technology, they don't want to interact with me. It's my own stuff I'm picking up, but they want to talk with my coworker. I was confused because I need to sign in my own laptop, and they want her sign in. I don't know, it's discrimination, my blindness, or I don't know anything because I look different, or it's kind of very confusing to me to be treated like that in the workplace too, or like in places like in classroom, or even in daily life. Is like getting around, going places. People tend to treat people with disability or Black people differently. uh,
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, and this is exactly what we want to explore today, Abby, that normalized behavior of treating people with disabilities differently, or as Neely named as less than. Neely, correct me if I misused or misspoke. Abby, I'm going to introduce the next two panelists, but then I want to come back to this so that we can continue to explore and invite their perspectives on this as well. Scott Tritt is a former board member at Kids Included Together and board member at Social Venture Partners San Diego. Scott has built on a successful career as a television news producer in California, with his journalistic training and ability to tell stories in a compelling and memorable way. Scott, I'm gonna have to learn some things from you. I'm trying to learn to tell my stories in a compelling way. But you, Scott, have lived with mild cerebral palsy, and that has led to you working as a one-on-one advocate in this space. Can you tell us more about that journey?
Lindsay, I appreciate the opportunity to join you. I'm here because Neely asked me to join, and I find my life goes smoother when I acquiesce to her demands. They're not very frequent, so it's relatively easy to do.
I think I found that too. I've only known her for 6 months.
I've never really considered myself an advocate in the conventional way, which is to say, I'm not a person who waves his fist and demands change in the public square, so to speak. I tend to do my advocacy through what I would term education, and more on a one-on-one basis. You asked a minute ago, what's the one thing we'd like to leave people with? And I think my answer to that question is to keep centered on the idea that questions are better than assumptions. Mm. And so what I mean by that is, if somebody sees me engaging in daily life and wants to ask me why I'm walking like I'm drunk, or why I'm doing this or that, I'd much rather have them ask me and have an opportunity to have a conversation rather than them making assumptions. It's the visual cue is the Boy Scout who helps the old lady across the street, and after she gets across the street, she says, "But I wanted to go over there, the other direction." And so the idea is we're always better off if we ask questions and engage in conversation exactly like we're doing today, rather than making assumptions about who somebody is or what they need.
Yes. Can you expand on that, Scott? I mean, for example, as a Black woman, one of the assumptions is that, well, one, we're hypersexualized at a very young age. Two, that if we're angry, then we are just angry Black women. What are some of the assumptions that you have had to bear?
Well, You know, my case of cerebral palsy is relatively mild, which is to say that I'm not in a wheelchair, and so I think I said to Laura when we spoke initially, I kind of work both sides of the coin, and that is to say, if it's, and I don't want to sound this unthoughtful, but I'm just trying to be open. If it's more convenient to be disabled, the situation where I want to get to the front of the line, or I want to park in a handicapped parking space, or something of that nature, then I'm perfectly fine with saying, hey, I'm entitled to this blue parking space. On the other hand, if I'm in an environment where my disability is not necessarily something I need to focus on, and I'm sitting in a chair, for example, nobody's going to know that I'm disabled. And so in that sense, I can play the able-bodied side of the coin. And that gives me some flexibility, if I can use that term, that other people might not have. But whatever side of the coin I'm playing, both are still a reality, right? I'm still disabled, whether or not it's immediately apparent, or whether or not I'm using it to my advantage, so to speak.
Yes. Does that sometimes give you, as W.E.B. Du Bois would have termed it, that double consciousness? You're living in the intersection of two groups, one who's given status and one who's denied status.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know, in my experience, that I ever feel like I've ever been denied status. I had a great upbringing, great parents, went to good schools. I've had jobs that I interviewed for, and I've been successful in the things that I've tried. So I don't know that my life is filled with this sense of being denied a lot of opportunities. Of course, I didn't choose to try to be an NBA basketball player because I didn't think that was realistic. But I've been able to accomplish the things that I've set out for. So, and it could be that I've been lucky. It could be that I was surrounded by people who wanted to lift me up rather than hold me down. It could be because on the rare occasions when I've come in contact with somebody who hasn't seen the world exactly as I thought they should, I've told them so. I'm not shy about expressing myself. And so perhaps that's worked to my advantage. It could be any of those factors.
Yeah. And is there a sense, as Abby was naming too, that, you know, when we talk about having different or varied access to privilege and status, have you seen how, as a white-bodied or white passing male, that has given you, can you see the varying levels of justice within the community based on race, based on gender, based on sexual identity, etc.?
Well, it's not something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. It's certainly been at the fore more recently. I was going to suggest sarcastically to Abby when she said, you know, people are nervous talking to me and they want to talk to the people that I'm with. I was going to suggest to her that maybe it's because of her success and magnetism that people are nervous. But I realize that's not exactly the spirit in which she offered the comment, but that's just a different way of looking at it. But for me, you know, again, I've been disabled all my life, so I've lived with that. I don't know what it's like to not be disabled. Some of the people that I feel the greatest sympathy for are pro athletes who go out on the field to play and end up having a traumatic injury and get carried off the field and have to readjust their entire life from being somebody who performed at an exceptional level to now being somebody who performs at a less capable level than most people. Those are pretty shocking adjustments. I knew a girl in college who graduated high school as an able-bodied female and arrived at her freshman year at college in a wheelchair because she'd been in a car accident over that summer. I've never had to face those kinds of adjustments, but certainly those would be the kinds of shifts that I would see as difficult, and certainly more difficult than any adjustment I've had to make.
Joy is a curriculum and experience designer at LTHJ Global. and a longtime organizer and advocate from Kansas City. They are an educator and facilitator on trans issues and other topics under the anti-oppression umbrella. And Joy is neurodivergent and is ADHD, ASD. They're also a dancer, cat lover, and cosplayer. I've been blessed to see some of that cosplaying in action. Joy, you know, what in introducing you, what I love is that in seeing Laura Kay working on the production of today's call, you reached out and said, hey, I think we're still missing a really important piece of representation on the panel. Can you say what that was and why you think it's so important that we raise that topic for exploration today?
Sure. So I have ADHD and I'm ASD, which is on the spectrum, autism spectrum. And for a lot of people like me, that can be an invisible disability. So a lot of times people who have invisible disabilities aren't able to qualify for benefits for disabilities very often, especially if they're able to work at a certain level to support themselves. Just FYI, anyone who does get disability is limited to what income they can have severely, just if anybody doesn't know that. But instead of being visually represented as being disabled, a lot of times people with invisible disabilities are perceived as being slow or rude or lazy. A lot of these labels actually apply to people who have mental health issues or disabilities. And so I thought that's an important piece of the disability spectrum to show.
Yeah. Thank you so much. There's, you know, we are often talking about this language of neurotypical and kind of laughing about that. What can you express for somebody, what is this concept of neurotypical, which then creates the construct of neurodivergence or neuroatypical? What does that even mean?
So neurotypical people are those whose neurofunctions are within what is perceived as typical or normal parameters. Anyone who's neurodiverse or neurodivergent is going to be someone whose neuroabilities fall outside of that range. And so for a lot of people with ASD, that would mean that some neurological development and skills are a lot higher than what you would perceive as typical, and some may be lower. High and low is not really a great way to express it, though. It's just outside of typical range.
Yeah. I'm going to come off of sharing now and want to have the panel, all Neely and Abby and Scott and Joy and Stephen, who's doing our ASL interpretation on view. Neely, kind of growing on what we've heard thus far and the work that you do, can you talk about how with children in the earliest points of school, they're already dealing with this system that is starting to put them into these groups of able-bodied, disabled, neurotypical, neurodivergent. What is, I mean, there's 20 things I want to ask you about that. What does that say about our society? What does that say about our school system? How does that impact our children? Please take any one of those questions.
Just like there's so many questions to that, there's a lot of different directions in that answer. But when you're working with children, I always say that children are 110% more accepting than adults are. So first, if you have an inclusive environment that children are beginning in, it's it always benefits them to be with peers that are different, because I mean, even as I have recently learned from you, Lindsay, that, you know, there's so many different moving parts. There's so many different aspects to ability, disability, race, gender, you know, on a culture. There's so many different things. And we have evolved as an organization to certain things that we have taught and said, and moving and learning forward to things that we don't say anymore, that we don't teach anymore, just because of how things progress. It is important, I think, for the most part. Now, I will say that, you know, people are people, and you have to make decisions on an individual and a case-by-case basis. So not everything works for every child. When, like Joy was just saying, that there are people on the spectrum that you may not know they are on the spectrum. And then there are other people on the spectrum that present differently. So you may or may not know they're on the spectrum, but you might see differences within the way they kind of conduct themselves that will be different. So I think that when society tries to take children and put them where they think they should be, that it's not really an equity type of thing. It's not about equality with inclusion. It's not about giving everyone the same thing. It's about giving children what they need. And a lot of times we don't know what they need. We need to ask and learn from them, right? Like, you take a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, there's a lot of very differing needs. So you can't always expect to know right away. It's like when we go into a center and someone says, oh, you know, I think this child has A, B, or C. It's like, it doesn't really matter what you think they might have or what you think they should be diagnosed with. What's important is, how do I support this child so they can be most successful? That's what we need to know. We need to know what we can do for this kid so that they can be successful. That's what's important.
Yes, yes, yes. I mean, first of all, everybody write down again, you know, we need to ask the child what they need. What does success look like? Don't worry, like 2 or 3 episodes later, right, Laura Kay, we're doing Unlearning Adultism, because this is a theme that keeps coming up. But, and I want to say, in raising children who can express what they need, I want a name. It's very exhausting, because my 2 children can express every need. And I'm like, good Lord, I'm just trying to get dinner.
I hear you.
Yeah.
I have some of those too.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying that we should do it. I want to take a pause because I'm aware that Stephen was meant to have a support person here, and there's been a lot of sharing. And so we're just going to take a pause so that Stephen can take a pause. Abby, expanding on what Neely was saying, Abby, and some great questions coming into the chat there. And Zena writes, what are the best ways to advocate
currently /has left the meeting
for diversity, for disability inclusion in a workplace that is not considered ableism or disabilities in DEI frameworks? I'm going to repeat that again. What are the best ways to advocate for disability and inclusion in a workplace that is not considered ableism or disabilities in their DEI frameworks before? Any thoughts, Abby?
Sorry, my screen reader was talking. So
Screen reader.
Yeah, I was just trying to turn off my talking thing. Do you think you could repeat that question real quick? I'm so sorry.
No, please don't apologize. Absolutely. Their question was, and Zena Marari writes, what are the best ways to advocate for disability inclusion in a workplace that has not considered ableism or disabilities in their DEI frameworks in the past? In your advocacy work, what have you been doing?
Yeah, I think advocate for disability is like being allies and understanding what kind of needs people with disability and not answering questions for them, because people with disability, unless they need help, they will let other people know. But if somebody talking about me, they should give me a chance to answer that question or educate other people saying, go ask her, or she's here.
Mhm.
And I shouldn't do that. That's not ableism at all. If they speak for me, that is ableism. But
Yes.
and the work advocacy work I'm doing now is advocating for people with disability, non-drivers who don't have better transportation system and excluded from getting around like everybody else. Our country, and especially rural areas, set up for people who can drive and cars, and but not people like me who can't drive. There's no way in my life I could drive and get around places in 10 minutes or 5 minutes. Probably place that takes 10 minutes for people who can just jump in their car and get to there will take me hour or two. I am advocating for, look, I think if this is human rights, not accessible transportation is right, not luxury or privilege. So that is what I'm advocating for.
Yes, yes. I mean, within organizations, what you're saying, what we often find, we're often shocked by when they are detailing their DEI work, how it doesn't have a lens around disability, doesn't have a lens about LGBTQIA rights, and not taking the full, mixed popcorn box of isms into account in the DEI work. And as you're saying, Abby, thinking about playing out some of the expectations within the workplace around time, around outputs based on varied abilities, and you find that it is very much skewed to a small subset of the population. Often the expectation is you have no neurodiversity, you wouldn't have children, you wouldn't blah, 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 blah. And I love what you're saying. Disability rights is human rights. It is human rights. Scott, in your work, especially this one-to-one work that you do you find that a lot of people, and especially as you were talking about athletes and going through that journey, do you find that in our culture we teach a lot of people that they should associate their value with their ability to play into capitalism, to do certain outputs, to be able to win certain types of rewards? What is the relationship between how we assign value within our culture, around the body, around our personhood, and to an ableistic society?
Well, I'm probably not going to answer your question in all the glory that I could. Maybe you can ask me a follow-up or two. I would say, and again, this is just my experience, right? Everybody on the panel is only speaking for themselves.
Mm.
I studied economics in college, so I'm a capitalist. And I also don't have any hesitation about my ability to succeed in that framework. I have the tools that I need. I have access to the support that I need. Maybe I'm not exactly hitting on the question you're wanting to explore.
Yeah, well, name it from your experience in terms of when we're talking about ableism and disability. It sounds as though you've had an experience where you haven't been impacted by the label of disability necessarily impacting your life. Why do you think that is?
Well, it could be the convergence of my positive attitude in dealing with it and wanting to minimize it and not wanting people to see me as disabled first. And the fact that the people that I've been dealing with on the other side have, for the most part, been fairly evolved in the sense of not making any incorrect assumptions, or when they have a question, as I said earlier, questions are better than assumptions. I'm not going to be offended at all if somebody asks me a stupid question and gives me the opportunity to clarify. I am going to be offended if somebody makes an assumption and proceeds down that road without taking a breath and saying, do I really understand the direction that I'm taking and the goal that I'm trying to accomplish? I'm going to be on a sailing trip in a couple of weeks, and I got an unexpected call from the travel agent today saying, hey, we just want to talk to you about the design of the boat and make sure you're comfortable and make sure we're briefed on what you need. I would much rather have that conversation now, and was grateful for that conversation, than arriving on the boat and finding out that, okay, I'm not going to be able to sleep in the room that I thought I was going to sleep in because it's upstairs, or this or that or the other thing. So I'm always an advocate for bringing out the questions and not making the assumptions. Does that get at what you were looking for? Absolutely.
And I think a follow-up question would be, is there something wrong with being, or where does the idea come from that there would be something wrong with being identified as disabled first?
Because it's only a piece of who I am. And in my view, it does not substantially limit the experience that I can have. One of the great experiences I had in high school was going on a road trip with a bunch of guys, and we pulled up to the lodge that we were going to be in, and we could see that the lodge was up a hill with a lot of steps without any railing or anything to hold on to. And the guy who was driving, who's a good friend of mine, turned to me and said, "Oh my gosh, I didn't think about that." And I turned back to him and said, "I'm glad you didn't. I don't want you to worry about it. We'll figure it out together." It's not, oh, Scott shouldn't come on the trip because he's not going to be able to get up the steps or this or that. Let's figure it out. Let's have a conversation.
Yeah. I love that curiosity. Joy, have you had a similar experience to Scott?
I suppose I have, in that I really only started to learn that I was on the spectrum and come out as being on the spectrum in the last several months. And every time in a job situation or any other kind of situation, I don't announce that I, have ADD, and it might impact how I need to receive information or the speed at which I might be able to give output. But rather than feeling like I always want to be treated like everybody else, I really wish for my whole life there had been an expectation to meet people where they are in any surrounding, in any environment. It would have made my life completely different. Instead of having to kind of hide those things about me or talk about them in a really kind of private way with only the people that I think it would affect, it could just be something that the environment is ready to meet. So that's something that I wish was true about fighting ableism, is that people thought about it as all of these things in society and this building and, you know, this theater and this service need to change and able to meet people where they are, instead of expecting everyone to try to reach this level of ability to enjoy it.
You started to name, Joy, that there's legislation in place that means that those that are disabled are only able to earn a certain amount. There's also that it can inhibit people's ability to get married, right? If
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. So I have a couple of friends who got married a couple of years ago, and this is in Missouri, but I believe it's similar in most states, where one of them is disabled and the other one is able-bodied. And as soon as a disabled person marries a person who is able-bodied, the expectation is on the couple for the able-bodied person to financially provide for the couple as a whole without any of the supports that the disabled person may have been receiving. And that puts a huge burden on a couple who had been able to live at a certain level of comfort and then isn't.
Joy,
Because,
I'm so sorry. I just need you to, because if everybody on the call had heard what you just said, they would have come off of mute and like started screaming at the top of their lungs.
Was it too quiet?
Plates. Yeah. No, so they must not have heard what you just said, because I don't see anybody like burning trash cans or
Right.
like ripping off their bras and starting to burn them. Can you say that again? Can you say,
Sure.
Can you just say that again for us, please?
Yeah, when a person who is disabled marries someone who is able-bodied or another disabled person, the amount that they are given in aid will either cease to exist altogether or be lessened dramatically, so that the couple's level of comfort will be obliterated. This couple that is my friends have already gotten divorced. They still have their relationship, but they decided to get divorced so that they could, live well.
We're going to pause again this time just to let that sink in. Okay, when we're talking about rights and naming that as of last week, apparently we are going to start losing more of them. But Sonia Renee Taylor, author of The Body Is Not an Apology and other great works, reminds us that yes, be angry about this most recent Supreme Court ruling, but remember that many members of our society never had rights to begin with, right? So go far past what Mr. Rogers said of look for the helpers, look for the people who have been figuring out how to survive without ever having access to equal rights. Those are the people to look for when you're looking for what to do next. Abby, somebody on this call now, somewhere between the like angry swear emoji that they posted and the like, I will go burn something in my house later, is wondering, what can I do tomorrow to get started on my unlearning ableism journey? Or what can I do tomorrow to start working on my street that I live to increase access? What might be your words of motivation to them?
I think I would say tomorrow or today, right now, like think about people with disability didn't ask to be disabled, but all are humans. And how can I, like Scott mentioned, ask questions, just welcome us instead of being like, I don't think she understands me. And a lot of times people don't think, especially blind people, because I think people understand that if you have a vision, you can understand better. And if you are blind, you probably don't know what is happening. So that's what people's just mentality, how they think. But I would say just treat everyone how you want to be treated. And about accessibility, I think, holy cow, there's so many. Advocating for people, if you have people who can't afford to own their own vehicle and getting around by public transportation system, how does that work? Like, do you have to walk 2 miles to get to catch a bus to get to where you wanted to go? Or like sidewalks, some sidewalks are not accessible for people who use a wheelchair. Like, there's some places no sidewalk, other places sidewalks are so skinny little and all not smooth enough for people who use a wheelchair to get around independently. And
Yes.
check out that when you're driving or walking, look, like, is this accessible for wheelchair people and people who use a cane, like blind people? Like, how is this accessible? Like, advocate in your neighborhood. This should be accessible. This should be accessible for everyone. Not only focus making accessible for cars, but not like buses too, like people who travel by foot and using canes and using a wheelchair, and how they get, and how you can make anything you can say to people who are building sidewalks and curb cuts and traffic lights, a lot of times not talking to me when I'm trying to cross. I am very, very independent blind person. I walk anywhere I want to go and catch a bus and cross a big streets and big sidewalks. Anywhere I go, like, I just get out and go. But a lot of times it's not accessible to cross streets that not safe to cross. When I push a button, it doesn't talk. That means it's not accessible for me. So yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. Neely, jumping on to all of those offerings from Abby, what am I thinking about if I want to start with how we are educating children about disability, about difference within schools? Where would I start?
Okay, I just want to add one thing before I go there. I think it also, when you're talking about accessibility, it's like making the improvements where you are as well. Like when Kit had a physical building and the curb cut was on one side of the street, but the accessible parking where you would drop somebody off and the ramp was on the other corner. So we were like, okay, so you think this is accessible, but it's actually not logical at all. You need to put another curb cut next to where somebody who would pull up in that accessible parking space would actually let someone get out who used a mobility device or who used a wheelchair. Like, there are those small things, like even when you do something small, it's going to benefit more people.
Yes,
So,
and there's the privilege. If you've never heard of the term curb cut, and you never thought about it, hello, privilege, my old friend. Yes,
right.
What else, Neely?
Puts a curb cut and then the ramp on the other side. I mean, come on now. Okay, so children, educating children. There is a wonderful book, and it is called Walk a While in My Autism by Kate Nagiri and Nan Nagiri and Kate McIntosh or something. I don't know, Janet, put it in the thing. She'll put it in the chat for me. I have people.
Thank
That's
you,
how it
Janet.
works.
Thank you, Janet.
So in this book, it's great. Okay, so it's called Walk a While in My Autism, but I have gone into my kids' schools and I've used it for everyone. Why? Because they have such great, it's a book full of activities that you can use with all different ages that really talk to differences. And when we talk about differences, thank you, Janet. When we talk about differences, it's really about so many things. So it's seeing what we have in common, seeing what's different, and it's about acceptance. And that's the beauty of it. When you look at a whole bunch of, one of the activities is about trail mix. So if I put all these different ingredients out, and some of them were raisins and chocolate chips and wasabi peas, like everyone here might pick something that they want in their trail mix, and you might have the same, you might have something different, but you get what you like, and it's always yummy. And it does it, I mean, is it great to see what you have in common, but it's also great to see what's different about you. And it's really taking things and making it simple. Like people get, kids get what they need, not what they want. So it's always about supporting what people need, giving them the supports that they need to make them successful. And when we're teaching children and when we're teaching adults, it's about the asking of questions and not making the assumptions. It's about making sure that they have the ability to learn how to advocate for yourself, because you're talking about being advocates. Being an advocate's really hard. Like it's not easy to be an advocate. Like I think, well, Scott, he probably like grew up like he was like, oh, Scott advocate. Like that was part of his personality though. That's just part of who he is. It's much easier for me as a mom to advocate to my children when when something happened to my kid at school. Oh, you better believe I walked in there and I was like Mama Bear. I was like, you know, that cannot happen to my kid. But for me in the doctor's office to advocate for myself, I was probably 28, 29 years old. It took me a long time to advocate for myself. So I think that it's a journey that people have to learn how to get there, and teaching children at a young age to be open to differences and looking at their community for who it is and being inclusive. That's how we get there. That's how advocacy develops.
Yes, yes, yes.
Lindsay, would you mind if I added something quickly?
Yes, please.
Well, first, I want to say hi to Janet, because Neely and I both know that Janet keeps Neely afloat. So that's number one.
Hi, Janet.
Number two, I've used that curb cut that Neely had installed at the office. So thank you for doing that. And number three, as we think about inclusion and access and these questions, and Neely mentioned this earlier, it's not only about making that individual's life better, right? The changes that we're contemplating. It's about changing it so that the workplace and the larger community is better too, right? Using the curb cut analogy for a second, we all know that people with grocery bags that have wheels on them use curb cuts. We all know that moms with strollers use curb cuts. We all know that the UPS guy used curb cuts, right? So the point is, anything we do to help a particular person or a particular class of people, if we do it right, and if we do it with input from that person or that group that we're trying to help, the hope would be that it makes us all stronger. So it's not about, oh, we have to accommodate this and that and this. It's how do we make our society and our workplace and our home more convenient for everybody, and the changes will get done in that. So it's just a different mentality of how to approach the question, right? It's about making the workplace better as opposed to accommodating what this one individual needs.
Yes, yes. As our kind of final question here, Joy, you said something that I think is really powerful, and I know somebody is on this call who is new to their ADD or ADHD or is losing their sight or is coming into their relationship with their disability and is scared to tell people about it, is scared about how people are going to treat them in a society that views difference as deficit. What do you want to say to that person? Like Scott said, it's an aspect of my identity. It is not my entire identity. What's your love message to that person as we close out today?
I think at least saying it to yourself and saying it about yourself in safe spaces makes you able to love your whole self instead of just loving the pieces of you that you think are acceptable to other people. So yeah, it might not be everything that you are, but it's a part of you that you have to come to terms with.
Yeah, yeah. As Abby said, and as we move to leave this place today, I would remind us, don't just treat people as you would want to be treated. One of the most powerful things about our oppressive culture is that it can even teach you to hate yourself. So my invitation to you as we close this space is treat people better than you some days treat yourself. And that might be a little bit of the difference. Thank you as always, friends. Thank you, Stephen, Joy, Neely, Abby, and Scott for creating this space. Thank you to our show's producer, Laura Kay, and thank you to all of you. I'll see you next month. Goodbye. Any final thoughts? Any aha moments?
Thank you so much.
Any new insights, things you wished you'd said?
I think a conversation about more about intersectionality would be fantastic. Really diving into how fighting any kind of oppression makes things better for other oppressed peoples, I think. Mm-hmm. Just because there's a common thread between groups who are oppressed in that they're seen as other, they're seen as outside of the norm, and society caters to the norm. And so if you're outside of that, you're left aside or pushed aside.
Yeah. And as Abby was naming, within this work, there's so many intersections of identities. If it's not hard enough being Black in America, and then Black and trans, Black and disabled, Black and it's just as Audre Lorde talks about, the intersections of her identity are in some way other, deviant, or just plain wrong in this society. Abby, you started to say something?
I was also going to add that I think more conversation about teaching children, like a lot of times people teach kids with disability how to get along with other kids without disability, but kids without disability don't usually get educated on how to get along with, for example, like a blind kid running around, they make fun of, or they stay away or something like that. I think it should be more conversation about educating kids who are not disabled, how to work with kids who are disabled instead of separating them from them.
Yes. Neely and Scott, is that some of the work that KIT does?
That's exactly what KIT does.
Yeah.
We educate providers on the inclusion of children with disabilities, diagnosed, not diagnosed, challenging behaviors. So part of our work is looking at educating everyone within that environment. So whether that's, you know, the adults, the other children, which is often asked, how do you explain disability to a child who asks about it or inquires about it? We get that question quite a bit. Like, how do you explain when this child says, why do they do that? Or why do they look that way? Or something like that. So that is part of our process.
That is one question I had on deck. Somebody said something, I think it was Scott, during your introduction. I had wanted to ask about the correlation between, you know, that kind of 1980s thinking of, I don't see color, right? And also there was that lesson, I think a lot of kids were taught in a well-meaning way of like, don't ask, like, or don't stare. That was the language. He was like, don't stare. And, you know, it removes the opportunity to be curious and to allow kids to explore. We stare at things that we are curious about as children. Yeah, I want to invite Stephen to share. You said that you also do this work.
All right, thank you so much. I won't be able to talk much because I was just here to translate today, but I didn't know this kind of event that will be going on. I'm so glad to be part of this event as a sign language interpreter, and I'm also a specialist. I did special education and also a disability rights advocate in my community. All right, just to contribute a little to much that has been said so far. I won't be saying much, but I believe on a good day I'll be able to say much. But today, so on the part of how we can promote inclusion and accessibility in our various innovation. There's a saying that say charity begins at home. We need to start from individual. It starts from me. It starts from you. It also starts from those that have children or persons with disability in their home. You see a parent that has a child with disability, they'll be hiding him or her, or the way they even treat this person is really, really not okay. And this disability is not a disease. It's not a disease, which can happen to anyone in life. So, and like Abby said, you treat yourself, you treat others the way you would like to be treated. If you know that blind person you saw on the road, the deaf person you saw on the road, someone on the wheelchair you saw on the road, if you know you won't like others to do bad to you, why do you need to do bad to such fellow because of his or her disability? He or she is not the cause of the disability, but is a fate that he or she needs to accept and move on with life. And if you look at it logically, when we talk about the issue of disabilities, as we were trained as a special educator, because I studied special education for the deaf, not only a sign language interpreter, we are trained that we all have one or two disabilities in one way or the other. Like Abby now, Abby is a visually impaired. Like she can read with braille. I can read in braille a bit. But let me ask you, Laura, can you read in braille?
In braille, no.
No, fine. So which means you are disabled when it comes to using braille. Do you know that?
Right. Yeah. I'm not able to read braille. Yeah.
Me either.
So whatever you find yourself you are unable to do, you are disabled in that aspect. And disability, people with disability, we need to bring them together because we are all one. We need to embrace love in our area. And when it comes to school in a place of work, the government agency have a lot of things to also do. Because by the time you give an instruction, there's disability right there that you don't discriminate against person with disability. If you discriminate, there's a section of the law that says if you discriminate against person with disability, you will be penalized for this offense. We see that a lot of people will avoid doing things like this. I will not be able to say much because of time today, but one of these days I will really be able to say lots, because this is what I've been doing for years, and in fact I really enjoy this. I always am not interpreting. In fact I'll be able to do lots and say much and also contribute. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Well, I think that's the perfect place to end today, friends. Thank you for your time and for joining me around this virtual dinner table. And there's a goodie bag of wine to no, there's not. If you were in my house, I would send you away with a bottle of wine. But
Actually, she would keep you there with a bottle of wine, more accurately.
probably more like that. Yeah, that's why there's so many guest bedrooms.
You also need to share. You also need to send mine.
Yeah, exactly. You get two.
Yeah,
Definitely get two. One for you and one for the person who is meant to be your support. Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Neely. Thank you, Joy. Thank you, Abby. Thank you, Laura Kay, for creating this space for us all. I hope you all have a wonderful whatever day it is.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Great work.